Alright guys, so we just had another major European election take place, this time over in France, after President Emmanuel Macron, who I've heard some people compare to being sort of like the French Obama with his neoliberal centrism, although that may be a little bit generous to Macron, but he recently called snap elections, and we just got the official results. So this, at the time when he called these elections, was to the great frustration from even members of his own coalition because the electoral outlook didn't really look too good for them, but he decided to steamroll ahead. And because of the way that the French parliamentary elections work, it seems like his gamble was that he thought in the first round of these elections that his coalition would be able to successfully not win outright, but to beat proportionately the more left-wing candidates. And then it would basically become like a head-to-head in the second round between the neoliberal centrists, if you want to call them that, or center-right party coalition, versus the far-right Marine Le Pen fascist coalition, right? And so he was betting on having that sort of dual choice for the French people going into the elections. Now, it ended up backfiring, because in the first round of elections, you actually had the left-wing, which is, under the newly formed banner, the very quickly formed banner after he called these elections, the New Popular Front, that significantly overperformed in the first round of the elections. Now, you also had the far-right front, which is in this labeled as the National Rally and Allies, and they did incredibly well in the first round as well. And so people were kind of thinking that maybe the far right was going to run away with this election in the second round. But what ended up happening is that you actually had a shocking development that I think goes contrary to my understanding of many similar instances to this throughout history, which is that you had left-wing candidates and more centrist Macron-aligned candidates who basically decided, okay, if we all make it to the second round, and you have the far-right candidate, the centrist Macron candidate, and then you have the left-wing candidate, whoever's in second place, or in other words has the best shot at defeating the far right, they will stay in the race, and then whoever's in the third place position will drop out, hoping that most of their voters go to either the centrist or the left-wing candidate, and that they can basically block the far right from taking power. And it looks like that basically worked. Not in every case, but in an overwhelming majority of the cases as I saw it, that's what ended up happening. So the reason I say that's surprising to me is because if you look back throughout history, it is a very consistent through line that when given the choice between fascists and socialists or even left-wingers, the centrist liberals will usually allow the fascists to take power over the socialists or the communists or the Greens or even the leftists, right? So it was kind of surprising in that way. But these were the final results, with the left-wing New Popular Front, which is a coalition of a bunch of different left-wing factions in France. They absolutely dominated in this, right? So here you have, in terms of the amount of seats that are going to be allocated, and you need 289 to form a majority, which is going to come into play here in a second. But so you have the New Popular Front, the leftists, getting 182 seats. You have the Ensemble Alliance, which are the Macronists, basically, getting 163 seats. And then in third place, you have the National Rally and Allies, which again are the right-wing, Marine Le Pen aligned candidates getting 143. And then you also had these other, conservative party candidates that got 68 seats. So you'll notice a couple of things here. First off, we don't have the historic comparison here, but this was a gigantic surge for the far right under Marine Le Pen. It's not as much as they wanted, right? They're super disappointed. I'm going to show you some of those videos here in a second. They're super disappointed that they didn't outright win this election and hit the 289 seat benchmark to take an outright, majority to fully control the, the parliament. But at the same time, you also had a massive surge from the left, right? And the Macronists took a massive hit as well. So it's definitely not as bad as it could have been. In fact, I'll say this was actually a pretty good result, given the circumstances, at least from a left-wing position. So we move on to some of the glorious coping and seething, pissing, crying, shitting their pants. Here we have from Sam. Drink it all in, folks. There were gasps of horror and tears at the RN Electoral Party as the first results estimates came in, which by some polls put a left-wing alliance ahead. A stunned silence replaced the flag-waving and chants that came after last week's first round of elections. Now, just to show you a little bit of video of this, here we have, I believe, the left-wing voters who were in favor of the New Popular Front here on the left, looking at the results, and then over here we got the Marine Le Pen voters on the right. just reacting in real time. I mean, these people just absolutely disgusted. These people obviously celebrating, I think for good reason there. Now, we also had some more coping and seething here from the End Wokeness account, right? Which is, typically spending their time going after like trans people and gay people and black people and just being, an abhorrent human being. But his account posted this, saying, "This is insane. Macron's party colluded with the far left socialists in order to block a Le Pen win. 200 candidates dropped out last week, coalescing against the far right. Well, the coup just paid off." I think for it to be a coup, you may need to be in power in the first place, but the socialists just won first place. It looks like France will not be saved. Well, it's certainly not going to be saved by Marie Le Pen, right? Obviously at this point. But I just want to take note of this because this was not the only person that I saw saying something similar to this. I saw a bunch of other people, some tech bros were getting in on this conversation as well. And the right-wing narrative right now is just amazing. Like, number one, they're obviously going with the idea of like, oh, the West has fallen, right? Because we didn't get our preferred fascist in power. But there's also this idea that like there was some sort of like illegal criminal conspiracy collusion going on here. Like this was just basic electoral strategy. Again, the way that this works is you have the first round of voting, right? And so in that first round, the candidates that will move on to the second round are going to be the first place candidate, the second place candidate, and then anybody else who I think gets above like 12.5% of the vote. And so what ended up happening is you would have in the first round, like the right-wing Marie Le Pen aligned candidate, and they would come in first place. And then in like a somewhat close second, you would have the left-wing New Popular Front candidate at, let's say like the Marie Le Pen candidate got 40%. Then the New Popular Front candidate gets like 28%, and then the Macron aligned candidate gets like 18%. All three of them would move on to the second round of voting. And so what happened was, again, very simple like strategy here from the centrists and from the left-wing candidates, where they just started saying, okay, whoever's in third place going into the second round, drop out. And then your voters will hopefully go to the second place candidate, and then they'll be able to block the far right. Like, this is not complicated. This is not crazy. I mean, this is something that I would see as being kind of crazy if it were to ever happen in the United States, because I genuinely do think that many Democrats would rather have even somebody like Trump, but, even somebody, who's not Trump himself, but somebody with all of Trump's policies and ideas, right? They would much rather have them in power than somebody like Bernie Sanders. I mean, we constantly talk about how much the extent to which the Democratic Party establishment will go to fight the left, even in some cases way more than they fight the far right, right? So it's surprising that this ended up working as well as it did, but there's nothing criminal going on here. There's nothing crazy going on here. This is just basic electoral strategy shit if you actually want to prevent the far right from taking power, right? And so kudos to them for making that work. Now, we move on, because we also had, of course, the New York Times with some fantastic framing here, saying, while many in France cheered what appeared to be a loss for the far right, others were fearful of what the far left might bring. Now, this is something that happens in the United States as well, is there is this constant, dishonest conflation between the far right and the far left. And there are many Democrats who do this, there are many pundits who do this, where they'll basically say, like, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are basically two sides of the same coin. Even though, like, what Marjorie Taylor Greene wants is just full-blown Christian nationalism in this country, and then what AOC wants is, like, let's address climate change. Let's make sure people are housed. Let's make sure people can eat. Let's make sure that people have access to healthcare, right? And they take these two platforms, and they pretend as if they're equally crazy, equally radical, when it's really not. And so what does this far left, radical, fearful, party coalition actually support here? Well, from the New York Times, deeper down in the article, they say the far left's proposed platform includes raising France's monthly minimum wage. Oh my God. Lowering the legal retirement age from 64 to 60. Radical, right? Building 1 million new affordable housing units in 5 years, and freezing the prices of basic necessities, including food, energy, and gas. Does this sound radical? Does this sound crazy to you guys yet? The state would also pay all households all costs associated with their children's education. So universal, education for children, including meals at cafeterias, so free lunch food, right? Transportation and extracurricular activities. So just basic like family policy, right? Instead of drastically cutting immigration, as the far right had promised, the coalition pledged to make the asylum process more generous and smooth. the New Popular Front, has pledged to come up with tens of billions of euros needed to pay for its programs by taxing wealthy individuals. They say it's time to tax the super rich and the super profits. Now, I read this and I'm like, that's all incredibly based. That is all incredibly good. But apparently in the minds of some people, this is like the West has fallen, right? I mean, end wokeness. Anybody else who's freaking out about the current situation, please point out exactly what in this policy, this entire platform, is radical, is crazy, is going to collapse civilization. If anything, it's policies like this that may actually save countries like France, right? I mean, we're talking about basic shit. Let's have living wages. Let's make the retirement age reasonable, right? Let's build affordable housing units. Let's make sure that we have, stable family policy in place so that people can afford to raise a child in a healthy environment and situation. None of this is crazy. Raise taxes on the super wealthy. Oh, that's crazy. That's unforgivable. That's radical. I mean, what are we talking about here? This is an incredibly reasonable platform. Now, we have the leader of this left-wing coalition, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who came out and had some words to say. He says, "We will have a prime minister from the New Popular Front. We will be able to decide many things by decree. On the international level, we will have to agree to recognize the state of Palestine." Incredibly based, right? And really, this is the bare minimum, recognizing the state of Palestine. The vast majority of the world already does. It's mostly just Western European governments, or really just allies of the United States, that still are holding off on recognizing a Palestinian state. But recently, we've had even some European countries, I think it was like Ireland and Spain and maybe Norway, who started to throw their hat in the ring and recognize the state of Palestine. Jean-Luc Mélenchon is saying he is going to do the same, right? And his coalition is going to try to do the same. So incredibly based on that front. And he has been pretty relentless as far as I've seen in terms of calling out Israeli war crimes and the genocide and all of that. So the other reason why this is interesting is because, because of the fact that this was relatively split, right? And nobody reached the 289 absolute majority, seating arrangement, there's going to have to be some sort of negotiations moving forward. And it's really still up in the air as far as I understand in terms of who's going to end up taking what specific positions and really be in control of France moving forward. And so you had this other development play out recently that was basically the French prime minister offered his resignation and Macron said no. So here from the Associated Press, Macron keeps France's prime minister in place for the stability of the country after a chaotic election. So again, guys, this was not nearly as bad as many people were thinking that it could end up being. A lot of people were thinking that Marine Le Pen and her coalition were just outright going to take the majority and were going to be able to take power, but they ended up coming in third place. I mean, you had the left-wing coalition in first, you had the Macronists in second, and then you have the far right in third place. And so again, a lot of this is up in the air. I'm not fully I don't have full understanding of how the internal, reality of French politics is going to play out moving forward. I don't think a lot of people in France do either, because this is kind of like a unprecedented situation they're in with such a massive split in the parliament. But it's going to be really interesting, right? Obviously, I think the left-wing coalition, they won the majority, or at least the plurality of the seats, and so they deserve to have the prime minister's position, right? I don't see how there could possibly be any other justification. Certainly you couldn't say that, Macron deserves, with his coalition, to stay as the ruling party, given the fact that they just lost a bunch of seats. Certainly you couldn't say that it's the far right, but I guess it kind of depends in terms of how they're going to negotiate amongst each other, I guess. I mean, you guys tell me if there's any French, political experts that watch my channel. How is this going to play out, right? Are you going to have the Macronists that now try to ally with the far right, and maybe they try to form some sort of a center-right coalition, or are they going to ally with the left-wing candidates and maybe try to form some sort of an alliance there? I don't know a lot about this, but I think it's going to be super interesting, and again, it's definitely not as bad as it could have been. Okay, real quick, guys, I was going to end the video there, but I also wanted to add another point that I thought about when I was editing the video, which is that this election, along with many others that have taken place recently, is such a perfect example of how the left wing, right, the actual left wing, not the neoliberal center left wing, that they can actually defeat the far right. They can be a bulwark against fascists if the centrists, if the neoliberals don't stand in their way. And it's also further evidence, given the fact that the far right under Marine Le Pen has risen so significantly in these elections, along with the rise of, Farage and his party in the UK and other examples throughout Europe. This is another example of how neoliberal centrism is not going to ever be able to sustainably defeat fascism. So anyways, I thought that was important to add on there at the end. I'll see you guys soon. I'll have more coverage for you guys tomorrow. I'm going to be covering this absolutely insane, bonkers report that came out from The Lancet about potentially the true death toll inside of Gaza, which they're predicting could be up to close to 200,000 at this point. And I'll have a couple other stories as well for you guys tomorrow. But as always, thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, do all of that good stuff. And French viewers of my channel, educate me if I got anything wrong on this one.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying